You know how most species panic when they see a fleet of battleships the size of Manhattan show up? Humans just lean back and ask if they brought snacks. When the Zephyrian Empire arrived with their diplomatic formation, they expected surrender. What they got was humanity's special brand of stubborn creativity. You know that sinking feeling when an uninvited guest shows up at your doorstep with enough firepower to glass your entire planet? Terra Station's sensors lit up like a holiday display when the Zephyrian armada tore through hyperspace. Each of their warships cast a shadow larger than most terrestrial cities, floating there like someone had convinced a mountain range to learn how to fly and got angry about it. Their formation wasn't defensive or tactical in any conventional sense. They arranged themselves in what they proudly termed a diplomatic posture, a perfect sphere of intimidation with enough overlapping fire arcs to sterilize a solar system. The sheer scale of it defied rational comprehension. It was like watching skyscrapers suddenly decide they were done with gravity and wanted to try a new career in orbital bombardment. Standard xenopsychology texts will tell you that 97% of spacefaring species experience immediate primal terror when confronted with such displays. The freeze response kicks in, followed by surrender impulses so strong they become biological imperatives. Entire civilizations have literally handed over their sovereignty because their nervous systems couldn't process that much implied violence without short-circuiting. But human neural wiring has this fascinating glitch when faced with overwhelming force. Instead of triggering panic responses, their brainstem apparently sends a different signal entirely. It whispers something like, "I wonder if they brought enough to share." This isn't metaphorical. We have actual neurological scans showing pleasure centers, activating where fear responses should be, dominating. Which brings us to Fleet Commander Vexithaner's unfortunate choice of opening statement. His transmission began with "Greetings, primitive mammals," which told humanity everything they needed to know about Zephyrian intentions. That single phrase revealed their assessment of human development, their intended negotiating posture, and their complete ignorance of how humans respond to being patronized. The thing about calling someone primitive is that it creates this beautiful narrative tension. It sets up expectations that can be so thoroughly subverted. Vexithaner thought he was establishing dominance through species-based hierarchy. What he was actually doing was giving humanity the perfect psychological framework for their countermove. Nothing makes a reversal sweeter than starting from the absolute bottom of your opponent's estimation. Human. Comm officers didn't even bother with defensive posturing or standard diplomatic protocols. They just opened a channel and asked if the Zephyrians needed any assistance with their impressive, but clearly stationary formation. The subtext was clear. Your scary ships are nice, but we're not impressed enough to stop being mildly inconvenienced by your presence. This refusal to perform the expected terror response created the first crack in the Zephyrian command structure. They'd prepared for surrender negotiations, not for being treated like tourists who'd taken a wrong turn at the Galactic Freeway exit. You know how some empires wrap unpleasant truths in such pretty words you almost forget they're threatening you? Vexithaner began his elaboration on integration with the kind of terminology that sounds wonderful in diplomatic briefings, but means something entirely different in practice. He spoke of educational exchanges that would uplift humanity, mutual benefit programs that would share Zephyrian technological marvels, cultural enrichment initiatives that would expose Earth to galactic civilization. Each benevolent term unraveled into its actual meaning if you listened carefully. Educational exchange meant indoctrination camps. Mutual benefit translated to resource extraction. Cultural enrichment implied the systematic dismantling of human traditions. The final threat came wrapped in the prettiest paper of all. Humans would serve the Empire in whatever capacity we deem suitable. It was the galactic equivalent of saying we're here to help you while quietly adding by owning you in the fine print. Historical analysis across 17 conquered systems shows this exact pattern repeating. Empires that specialize in absorption rather than annihilation develop this specific linguistic toolkit. They sugarcoat the bitter pill of submission with vocabulary that makes conquest sound like charity. The words change slightly depending on the species being assimilated, but the structure remains identical. Promise advancement, deliver subservience. Hartwell recognized the script immediately. Any human who'd paid attention in history class would have. It was the same playbook used by colonial powers on Earth for centuries. His calm reception of these threats wasn't ignorance or diplomatic training. It was the stillness of a predator watching prey approach a trap it set hours earlier. When Hartwell asked, "What does integration truly entail?" he wasn't seeking clarification. He was setting verbal snares. The question forced Vexithaner to elaborate, to make explicit what had been carefully implied, to detail the mechanisms of subjugation while maintaining the fiction of benevolence. The Zepyrian commander walked right into the trap. He spent 3 minutes detailing how human institutions would be dismantled, how populations would be relocated, how resources would be managed, for the Empire's benefit, all while using terms like administrative restructuring and optimized allocation. He never noticed he was confessing to planned cultural genocide while calling it humanitarian intervention, which brings us to humanity's oldest and most reliable survival tool, letting enemies dig their own graves with their words. Humans have this peculiar talent for getting opponents to articulate their worst intentions while believing they're winning the negotiation. It's not deception exactly, more like creating conditions where truth becomes unavoidable. The recording of that exchange would later circulate through 7 systems as a masterclass in how not to negotiate with humans. Vexithaner kept talking, each sentence adding another layer to the case against his own empire, while Hartwell simply listened and occasionally nodded as if receiving helpful information. The human negotiator understood something fundamental. The most damaging weapons in diplomacy often aren't threats or counter-threats, but carefully placed questions that force your opponent to reveal their hand completely. You know what terrifies advanced militaries more than superior technology? Inconvenient creativity. When Vexithaner pressed Hartwell about Earth's defensive capabilities, the human commander didn't list weapon specifications or fleet numbers. Instead, he told a story about a small island and a powerful invader from his planet's history. The details were almost embarrassingly simple. When faced with overwhelming force, the defenders didn't build bigger guns. They dug holes, lots and lots of holes. The psychological impact of this anecdote against a fleet of starships would become legendary in tactical analysis circles. Here was the ultimate asymmetry: billion-credit warships with quantum targeting systems versus determined primates with shovels and stubbornness. Vexithaner's sensors could calculate energy signatures and projectile trajectories, but how does one compute the combat effectiveness of a well-placed pit trap? The Zepyrian commander's confusion was almost palpable through the comlink. You could practically hear his tactical computer rejecting the input parameters. Anthropological studies of human warfare reveal this pattern repeating across their history. They don't necessarily favor direct engagement when terrain exploitation offers better options. A canyon becomes a killing zone, a forest becomes ambush, territory, and apparently even empty fields become elaborate obstacle courses. Their military academies teach something called asymmetric warfare, which basically means making your opponent's advantages irrelevant through environmental creativity. The Zepyrians had prepared for technological parity assessments. They expected to compare shield strengths and weapons yields, to run cost-benefit analyses on orbital bombardment versus ground invasion. What they received was a lesson in evolutionary stubbornness. Hartwell's calm delivery of this seemingly primitive story masked a seismic shift in the conversation. He wasn't just sharing history, he was redefining the very parameters of combat in real time. This historical anecdote achieved something remarkable. It reframed humans not as potential targets, but as terrain. And terrain doesn't fight fair. Terrain doesn't respect rules of engagement. Terrain waits patiently for you to make mistakes, and then punishes you for them. The psychological impact forced the Zepyrians to reconsider their entire invasion calculus. How do you wage war against landscape that thinks? But here's the thing about holes. They're just the visible part of much deeper preparations. The story wasn't really about literal holes in the ground. It was about mindset. It signaled that humanity would rather reshape reality than accept someone else's definition of conflict, that they'd choose labor-intensive, unpredictable solutions over conventional military responses, that they'd make invasion so inconvenient and costly that even victory would feel like defeat. Hartwell's choice of anecdote revealed more about human defensive philosophy than any weapons demonstration could have. It communicated that Earth's protection didn't rely on technology alone, but on willingness to engage in profoundly uneven exchanges of effort. The unspoken question hung in the communication channel. How many man-hours are you willing to spend countering our shovel work? The Zephyrians had come prepared for a technological contest. They found themselves facing a test of endurance against a species that apparently considered backbreaking labor a reasonable afternoon activity. You know that moment when a poker player reveals they weren't bluffing? They were just playing a different game entirely? The Zephyrians made the classic mistake of assuming humanity's calm demeanor indicated weakness rather than preparation. When Vexithaner accused Hartwell of bluffing about hidden defensive capabilities, space itself seemed to ripple in response, not from cloaking devices disengaging but from something far more unsettling, calculated positioning coming into alignment. The Defiant emerged first, a cruiser that looked less designed and more assembled from spare parts that refused to quit. Its appearance wasn't sleek or intimidating in the conventional sense. It was brutally functional, all reinforced angles, and visible weld seams with scorch marks patterning its hull like battle scars earned through actual combat, rather than simulations. This ship didn't just look like it could take punishment, it looked like it enjoyed the process. Human military design principles prioritize redundancy over elegance in ways that baffle most galactic engineers. Every critical system has 3 backups, each capable of operating independently if the primary fails. Their power conduits run through multiple pathways, their life support systems have quadruple redundancy, and their command centers can operate from 6 different locations on the ship. It's not over-engineering, it's the manifestation of a species that expects things to go wrong and plans accordingly. Then the third battle group materialized not from stealth technology, but from strategic placement in sensor blind spots created by gravitational anomalies and radiation pockets. They hadn't been hiding. They'd been positioned where Zephyrian scanners couldn't effectively penetrate, waiting for the precise moment when their appearance would maximum psychological impact. The timing wasn't accidental. It was choreographed theater with real consequences. Vexithaner's sensor operators scrambled to update threat assessments as tactical computers recalculated engagement probabilities. The math suddenly shifted from favorable invasion scenarios to potential mutual destruction calculations. Zephyrian targeting systems flickered as they tried to establish firing solutions on vessels that kept moving in unpredictable patterns while maintaining perfect formation cohesion. Hartwell's casual comment about this being a demonstration underscored the precision of the reveal. The human commander hadn't been negotiating from weakness. He'd been providing opportunities for the Zephyrians to reconsider their position before showing them exactly why they should. What seemed like desperation tactics were actually calibrated, revelations of capability. Each disclosure timed to undermine Zephyrian confidence at specific intervals. This wasn't a bluff in the conventional sense. Bluffs imply deception about existing capabilities. Humanity had simply chosen not to disclose their full defensive posture until necessary. The difference is crucial. One is about false representation, the other about strategic timing of truth delivery. The Zephyrians had expected either submission or desperate resistance. They received neither. The emergence of these forces transformed the negotiation dynamics completely. Vexithaner now faced not just the theoretical possibility of resistance, but the practical reality of coordinated defensive systems operating with clear competence. Hartwell's earlier stories about holes and determination suddenly made different sense. They weren't metaphors for primitive defense, but warnings about unconventional tactical thinking. Which brings us to the essential difference between a bluff and a calibrated reveal of unpleasant truths. One hopes the opponent folds without checking the hand. The other ensures they see exactly what they're up against before they make their final decision. Humanity hadn't been hiding their capabilities out of weakness. They'd been waiting for the optimal moment to show exactly why invasion would be mathematically unsound. You know how some weapons aren't just tools, they're statements? When the Retribution entered sensor range, every Zephyrian display started complaining simultaneously about scale errors. Their computers kept recalculating mass estimations like they'd encountered a mathematical impossibility. This wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a mobile mountain range that had somehow acquired thrusters and developed a profoundly bad attitude. The design philosophy screamed what humans call kinetic persuasion, rather than technical elegance. Its main guns fired railroad-sized projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, making the exact impact location almost irrelevant. The engineering team had this wonderfully understated term for the effect: aggressive matter redistribution. Translation: whatever gets hit stops being matter and starts being physics homework. Human dreadnoughts prioritize sheer survivability over delicate systems in ways that baffle most galactic engineers. Every critical system has multiple backups, power conduits run through redundant pathways, and the command centers can operate from 6 different locations. The ship wasn't designed to avoid damage. It was designed to absorb punishment like some enormous metallic sponge and keep functioning. There are documented instances of these vessels completing missions after losing significant portions of their structure, including the main bridge. Hartwell's explanation was perfectly calibrated to undermine Zephyrian assumptions. He described the retribution with the casual tone someone might use to explain why they bought a bigger lawnmower. Built her when we got tired of pirates reframed this colossal expression of power as simple, pragmatic problem-solving. The subtext was clear. This overwhelming force represented nothing more than humanity getting mildly irritated and deciding to solve the issue permanently. The Zephyrians now faced something that shouldn't exist according to their intelligence: assessments of human technological development. Their assumptions about industrial capacity unraveled faster than their targeting computers could recalibrate. Every piece of their pre-invasion planning had suggested humanity might possess defensive capabilities, but nothing on this scale. The disparity between expected opposition and actual opposition created cognitive dissonance throughout their command structure. The Retribution wasn't just a ship, it was a question mark made of armor plate, and the Zephyrians suddenly had no answers. Its mere presence forced a complete reevaluation of the strategic situation. Invasion plans that had seemed certain now appeared recklessly optimistic. Calculations that had shown favorable outcomes now indicated potential mutual destruction scenarios. The psychological impact outweighed even the physical threat. But here's the thing about big guns: they're only part of the defensive puzzle. The Retribution represented the visible tip of humanity's defensive capability, the part they wanted you to see and worry about. Its construction required the combined efforts of every major industrial power on Earth, working with efficiency usually reserved for species facing extinction. This collaborative effort signaled something important. Humanity would rather invest insane resources in defense than surrender an inch of autonomy. The ship's standard energy shielding and excellent damage control protocols completed the picture. This wasn't just about delivering overwhelming force. It was about surviving the return fire. The design reflected a deep understanding that battles are often won through resilience rather than pure offensive capability. Humans build their warships like they approach problems. Assume things will go wrong and make sure you can keep functioning when they do. You know how humans hate being surprised? They managed to institutionalize that specific hatred into an entire defense philosophy. Hartwell introduced what they call the Gibraltar Protocol, named after a rock formation back on Earth that apparently told invaders no for several centuries straight. The name itself reveals the mindset. They're not thinking in terms of ships or shields, but geological timescales and permanent fortification. This protocol turns ordinary space infrastructure into something resembling Swiss cheese, but with malicious intent. Tunnels weave through asteroid fields, supply depots hide inside seemingly inert rocks, and every piece of orbital debris becomes potential cover for hidden weapon emplacements. It's the kind of defensive thinking that makes military planners develop nervous twitches. You're not just scanning for ships anymore, you're checking every floating rock for suspicious geometric patterns. Strategic analysis shows human defenses essentially mimic urban warfare principles scaled up to orbital mechanics. They treat asteroid belts like city streets, using natural cover for ambushes and turning choke points into kill zones. The philosophy is simple: make the environment fight for you so you don't have to. Vexithaner's question about Terra Station's specific fortifications completely missed the actual strategic picture. He was looking at the visible structure, while Hartwell was describing the entire ecosystem of defense surrounding it. The station itself isn't really a fortress in the traditional sense. It's just the visible tip of a defensive iceberg that spans the entire solar system. Hartwell's calm confirmation of this fact signaled a fundamental cultural divergence between human and Zephyrian military thinking. Zephyrians build ships meant to project power across space. Humans build labyrinths meant to absorb and complicate invasion attempts. One approach values mobility and striking power. The other values making territory fundamentally unwelcoming to visitors. This protocol makes traditional cost calculation models completely impossible. How do you budget for an invasion when every asteroid might suddenly sprout weapons? How do you calculate risk when the environment itself might become hostile? Standard invasion math assumes predictable resistance from known defensive positions. The Gibraltar Protocol substitutes that predictability with the constant possibility that any piece of space rock might decide to participate in the battle. The sheer scale of preparation reveals something important about human psychology. They'd rather spend years digging tunnels and hiding weapons than face the possibility of being caught unprepared. This isn't paranoia. It's institutionalized preparation based on historical experience. Their military doctrine assumes that if something can go wrong, it will, and that the best defense is making sure your opponent regrets trying. Which brings us to the actual number of guns waiting behind those rocks. The protocol isn't about having overwhelming firepower. It's about having just enough weaponry and just enough places to make systematic invasion mathematically impractical. Each hidden emplacement might not be impressive on its own, but collectively they create a defensive network that can't be quickly or cheaply neutralized. The Zephyrians face not just ships but an entire armed environment. You know that magic trick where handkerchiefs keep coming out of a sleeve? Humanity basically did that with missile platforms. When Ensign Walsh triggered the perimeter defense grid, space suddenly developed what looked like severe acne. 800 active weapon platforms plus another 200 in standby mode emerged from perfect concealment. Their activation sequences lighting up Zephyrian sensors like festival displays. The clever part wasn't the technology, it was the positioning. These platforms weren't cloaked or shielded from detection. They'd been physically embedded within asteroid belts and random debris fields, disguised as ordinary space junk, waiting patiently for someone to extend the invitation. Each one had been placed with meticulous attention to natural cover and sensor shadowing. They weren't hiding from detection so much as hiding in plain sight among the background noise of the system. Tactical analysis shows this approach favors distributed firepower over concentrated capital ships. Each platform individually represents a minor threat, but collectively they create a defensive network that's nightmarish to neutralize. The platforms follow a simple design philosophy: cheap, disposable, and perfectly capable of ruining a Zephyrian commander's day if ignored. They're the military equivalent of placing thumbtacks on every chair in a room, individually insignificant, collectively discouraging anyone from sitting down. The sheer redundancy makes surgical strikes completely impossible. You can't just target command ships or key installations when 800 weapons platforms suddenly require your attention. To truly eliminate the threat, you'd need to sanitize the entire volume of space, which isn't just impractical. It's mathematically staggering in terms of time and resource expenditure. It transforms what should be a straightforward military engagement into a tedious and costly cleanup operation. Walsh's odd reaction that truncated wholly, that got cut off by sheer surprise, perfectly captures the visceral impact of seeing hidden defenses become immediate threats. It's one thing to know theoretically that defenses exist. It's another to watch space itself suddenly bristle with weapons that weren't there moments earlier. That moment of realization shifts something fundamental in the tactical calculus. The honeycomb defense Hartwell mentioned earlier wasn't just metaphor, it was literal engineering reality. The human defensive network actually resembles the structure of honeycomb, with interlocking fields of fire and overlapping coverage areas. Each platform covers its neighbors, creating a defensive mesh that's resilient to individual losses. Lose one platform and 5 others can cover its territory. Lose a dozen and the system recalibrates automatically. But here's the thing about humans. They never build alone when they can recruit help. This entire defensive network was constructed in approximately 3 years, which shouldn't be possible for a single species working in isolation. The scale and speed of deployment suggests outside assistance, though the humans weren't exactly advertising their collaborators. The rapid construction timeline itself becomes another data point in the growing list of things the Zephyrians underestimated. Each platform follows standardized design principles with kinetic projection, systems similar to those on human capital ships, just scaled down for individual deployment. This modular approach allows for easier maintenance and replacement. They're programmed with automated targeting solutions for anything entering the system with hostile intent, operating on a simple set of rules rather than requiring direct control. The automation represents another human preference. Set it and forget it defense systems that work while everyone's attention is elsewhere. The psychological impact of this sudden emergence can't be overstated. It forced the Zephyrians to confront not just the physical reality of these weapons, but the strategic implications of their deployment. This wasn't just about firepower. It was about demonstrating that humanity had turned their entire solar system into a prepared battlefield. Every asteroid, every piece of debris, every empty patch of space suddenly became potentially armed and dangerous. You know how humans love to talk about individualism and personal freedom? Watch what happens when you threaten one of them. Suddenly, that rugged individualism transforms into something else entirely, a single coordinated organism with shared purpose. When Hartwell dropped that pack animals line, he wasn't just making conversation. He was revealing operational doctrine written directly into human DNA. This isn't just biological impulse. It's strategic reality. Threaten one human settlement and you're not dealing with local defenses. You're engaging their entire species plus every civilization they've ever exchanged recipes with. Their coordination under pressure defies standard sociological models. Most species fracture under existential threats. Humans consolidate. They rally. They share resources. They build together in ways that consistently exceed predictions. That 3-year timeline for constructing their defense network wasn't boasting. It was a warning about exponential response curves. Zephyrian expansion models likely assumed slow, isolated technological development based on their observations of other emerging spacefaring species. They expected humanity to follow similar patterns of gradual advancement. Instead, they encountered collaborative acceleration that turned years into months through sheer collective effort. Hartwell's blunt admission about outside assistance reframed humanity completely. They weren't a standalone threat. They were networked threat multipliers. Their willingness to accept help and incorporate external technologies revealed a flexibility most empires lack. While expansionist powers develop rigid bureaucratic structures, humans crowdsource solutions. Their perceived primitivity became advantage. They could adapt alien technologies without being constrained by institutional traditions. The human approach to survival mirrors their evolutionary history. They spent millennia as medium-sized predators surrounded by larger threats. Their success came from cooperation, tool use, and turning weaknesses into advantages. That same pattern repeats at interstellar scale. They'll endure tremendous inconvenience for independence, invest insane resources in preparedness, and recruit unlikely allies rather than submit. This pack mentality manifests in their military doctrine. Ships designed with multiple redundant systems, defense networks that favor distributed resilience over concentrated power, and tactical flexibility that prioritizes adaptation over rigid doctrine. They assume everything will go wrong during conflicts, plan for worst-case scenarios, and consider themselves fortunate when things only go moderately badly. Their galactic political strategy reflects this collective approach too. Equal parts careful preparation, elaborate tactical deception, and stubborn refusal to be impressed by displays of force. They treat diplomacy like extended pack behavior, building relationships, testing loyalties, and establishing mutual protection networks. The Zephyrians expected to deal with a unified government. They found themselves facing a species that had turned collective defense into art form. The willingness to endure hardship for community protection becomes measurable in their resource allocation. They'll redirect entire economic outputs toward defense projects, accept lower living standards for greater security, and prioritize long-term survival over short-term comfort. This isn't desperation, it's calculated investment in species continuity. Which brings us to exactly who those helpful friends were that accelerated human military development by decades. The assistance didn't come from expected quarters or established powers. You know how every underdog story has mysterious benefactors appearing at the last moment? Humanity's assistance arrived with varying numbers of limbs and distinctly anxious energy signatures. Three species that had been silent witnesses to Zephyrian expansion patterns decided they'd seen enough. Their intervention wasn't charitable. It was the calculated self-interest of civilizations that recognized they might be next on the integration list. Political analysis across multiple conflicts shows threatened states consistently form covert alliances against common predators. These arrangements rarely involve grand declarations or formal treaties. They operate through back channels, shared intelligence, and technology transfers that leave minimal paper trails. The assistance humanity received followed this exact pattern: quiet, deniable, and devastatingly effective. The technology sharing alone advanced human military development by approximately 5 decades practically overnight. Their allies provided not just hardware schematics, but complete operational doctrines and tactical assessments. They delivered detailed analyses of Zephyrian fleet formations, command structure vulnerabilities, and psychological profiling of key officers. This intelligence proved more valuable than any weapon system. It allowed humanity to understand their opponent better than the Zephyrians understood themselves. Humanity's perceived primitive status became perfect camouflage for receiving these advanced capabilities. While the Zephyrians focused on technological disparity assessments, humans were quietly integrating alien systems into their existing infrastructure. The retribution systems, the defense grid coordination, even the Gibraltar Protocol's implementation all reflected hybrid technologies that shouldn't have been possible given humanity's supposed development level. Vexithaner now faced something far more dangerous than a single species defiance. He confronted the accumulated resentment of every civilization his empire had pressured, absorbed, or threatened. The tactical assistance represented just one aspect: the psychological impact of facing multiple species' collective experience with Zephyrian expansion policies. Each hidden weapon platform, each coordinated defense maneuver, carried the weight of lessons learned from previous encounters. This alliance transformed the strategic equation from impossible to merely improbable. The Zephyrian assumption of human isolation represented their greatest intelligence failure. They'd assessed technological development timelines without accounting for knowledge transfer mechanisms. They'd calculated industrial capacity without considering collaborative manufacturing efforts. They'd projected military responses without anticipating the incorporation of multiple species combat experience. The early warning about Zephyrian expansion tendencies proved crucial. That 5-year head start allowed for defensive preparations that would otherwise have been impossible. The timing suggests careful calculation by humanity's allies, enough advance notice to prepare, but not so much that the Zephyrians might detect the collaboration. The assistance followed precise thresholds, sufficient technology transfer to achieve parity, but not so much that it would trigger immediate Zephyrian escalation. The resulting hybrid technologies created capabilities the Zephyrians couldn't easily categorize or counter, systems that blended human durability with alien precision, human redundancy with alien efficiency. This technological fusion produced defensive networks that operated on unfamiliar principles, forcing the Zephyrians to constantly recalibrate their threat assessments. The alliance's success demonstrated that collective security could effectively counter imperial expansion. Other species watching the confrontation saw proof that coordination and technology sharing could level the playing field against superior forces. The message resonated through diplomatic channels. Predation becomes considerably less appealing when prey organizations start comparing notes and sharing defensive solutions. You know that precise moment when overconfidence collides with inconvenient reality? That subtle squeak of a command chair shifting weight as preconceptions crumble. Vexithaner's posture underwent this exact transformation, his imposing invasion fleet commander demeanor softening into that of an unexpectedly uncomfortable negotiation partner. The physical change was slight but profound, like watching tectonic plates reluctantly acknowledge they'd been moving in the wrong direction. The word equals entered the conversation with the quiet impact of a seismic event. That single term tilted galactic diplomacy on its axis, recalibrating power dynamics that had seemed permanently fixed. Hartwell extended what appeared to be strategic warmth, face-saving exit strategies carefully wrapped in mutual benefit proposals. The offer sounded generous, but contained precise calculations about what the Zephyrians could reasonably accept without losing institutional credibility. Psychological analysis across multiple First contact scenario shows successful deterrence consistently leads to this reclassification process. Adversaries become peers not through friendship or shared values, but through demonstrated capability that forces reassessment. The Zephyrian commander's mental shift from conquest planning to damage limitation represented textbook crisis management adaptation. He wasn't abandoning objectives so much as recalculating achievable outcomes based on new data, inputs. Technological exchange programs and cultural sharing initiatives that had been offered under duress suddenly became genuine negotiation points. The same proposals that minutes earlier sounded like coerced integration now represented potential mutual benefits. Hartwell's consistent refusal to appear impressed by Zephyrian displays became his strongest bargaining position. That emotional neutrality communicated that humanity neither feared nor worshipped advanced technology. They simply assessed its utility. The diplomatic inversion. From coercive integration to voluntary, collaboration represents one of the rarest outcomes in interspecies relations. Most encounters follow predictable patterns of dominance or submission. This shift required both parties to simultaneously recalibrate their positions without losing institutional face. The humans achieved this through what they call giving someone an off-ramp, providing negotiation alternatives that allow opponents to retreat gracefully while claiming achieved objectives. Vexathaner's tactical computers continued running updated invasion scenarios, but his attention had clearly shifted to evaluating Hartwell's proposals. The economic calculations changed from invasion cost-benefit analysis to trade agreement potential. Military assessments transformed from engagement probabilities to security partnership evaluations. This recalibration wasn't about surrender. It was about recognizing that cooperation might achieve Zephyrian goals more efficiently than conquest. Humanity's negotiating position reflected deep understanding of imperial psychology. They knew expansionist powers value stability and predictability almost as much as new territory. Their offers provided structured frameworks for interaction that promised reduced uncertainty. The proposals included monitoring provisions, gradual implementation timelines, and verification mechanisms that addressed Zephyrian institutional concerns about loss of control. The conversation's tone shifted from confrontation to problem-solving. Questions about human capabilities became inquiries about collaboration potential. Discussions of military strength transformed into technology-sharing opportunities. This psychological pivot demonstrated both species' ability to adapt rapidly when presented with better options than mutual destruction. The humans understood that the most successful negotiations occur when all parties believe they've gained something worthwhile, which brings us to what actually emerged from those initial tense exchanges. The shift in tone laid groundwork for substantive discussions that would extend far beyond this single confrontation. Both sides began exploring areas of mutual interest that hadn't been considered when the encounter began. The Zephyrians discovered that humans offered unexpected value beyond simple territorial acquisition, while humanity gained recognition that couldn't be achieved through isolation or defiance alone. You know how some victories aren't about destroying enemies but about making better neighbors? The week following the confrontation saw formal diplomacy replacing warship posturing completely. Zephyrian diplomats arrived with revised threat assessments and actual data pads instead of weapon systems, their body language signaling this fundamental recalibration of intentions. The transition felt like watching a predator suddenly remember it had hands and could use them for shaking rather than tearing. Mutual defense agreements, technology sharing programs, trade route negotiations. All the things the Zephyrians had intended to impose through coercion became subjects of actual negotiation. The discussions followed structured frameworks with verification mechanisms and gradual implementation timelines that addressed both parties' security concerns. Historical analysis across galactic conflicts shows imposed settlements tend to fail within decades, while negotiated arrangements often endure for centuries. The shift from dominance to collaboration represented rare diplomatic maturity from both species. Humanity gained more than just security through this process. They acquired tangible influence, a seat at the table earned through demonstrated capability rather than inherited status. Their negotiating position reflected careful study of Zephyrian institutional psychology. offering structured interactions that provided predictability the Empire valued almost as much as expansion. The agreements included cultural exchange programs that would gradually reduce mutual suspicion through personal connections. Hartwell's promotion to Outer Systems Defense Coordinator acknowledged the credibility forged during that initial confrontation. His new role involved implementing the hybrid defense strategies that had proven so effective, combining human resilience with alien technological insights. The appointment signaled institutional recognition that strategic creativity mattered more than pure firepower in modern galactic relations. His first directive involved expanding the Gibraltar Protocol to include neighboring systems seeking protection. The wider galaxy watched this new power emerge through entirely unconventional means. Humanity hadn't achieved influence through conquest or technological superiority, but through stubborn refusal to accept someone else's assessment of their capabilities. Their rise demonstrated that reputation could be built through resilience and creative problem-solving rather than traditional measures of power. Other species began reassessing their own defensive strategies based on this model. 3 months later, the first Zephyrian-human trade agreement was signed aboard Terra Station, without a single shot being fired. The ceremony featured actual smiles rather than forced diplomatic expressions, suggesting genuine mutual respect had developed. The agreement established standardized protocols for technology transfer, resource exchange, and security cooperation that would serve as templates for future interspecies relations. Early trade metrics showed both economies benefiting from the new exchange routes. But here's the thing about reputation. It spreads faster than light through gossip channels. News of humanity's successful negotiations circulated through 7 systems within weeks, shifting their galactic status from emerging species to valuable potential partner. The narrative wasn't about military victory, but about diplomatic creativity. How they'd transformed confrontation into collaboration through preparation and strategic patience. This reputation for turning conflicts into partnerships became their most valuable diplomatic currency. You know how news travels through tight-knit communities? Information moves faster than official diplomatic channels, and suddenly every species wants to know about the mammals who told a major empire not today. Word about humanity's defensive performance spread through 7 systems within weeks, transforming Earth's reputation from potential target to potential partner almost overnight. The galactic gossip mill operates on success stories, and humanity had just provided the season's most compelling narrative. Other species that had been quietly wary of Zephyrian expansion patterns suddenly saw new possibilities. Where they'd previously viewed Earth as another civilization destined for integration, they now recognized a potential ally who demonstrated creative resistance techniques. Humanity's reputation shifted in precise terminology from easy target to hard target with interesting ideas. The distinction matters. Being difficult to conquer is one thing, but being difficult in fascinating ways makes others want to understand your methods. The emerging narrative wasn't about human aggression or military superiority. It centered on resilience and collaborative creativity, how they'd turned conventional defense assumptions inside out using hybrid technologies and unconventional tactics. This framing resonated with species that valued independence but lacked the resources for direct confrontation. They saw in humanity's approach potential strategies they might adapt for their own protection. Invitations began arriving through back channels and formal diplomatic circuits alike. Cultural exchange proposals, joint research initiatives, even military coordination exercises, all the things humanity might have had to request suddenly came offering themselves. Earth became a sought-after independent power specifically because it had refused integration. Its value lay in demonstrated willingness to defend autonomy through means others hadn't considered. This reputation shift illustrates how information diffusion follows success patterns in interspecies networks. Stories about effective resistance spread faster than tales of conquest, because they offer hope to smaller civilizations. The gossip wasn't just entertainment, it was strategic intelligence sharing disguised as social exchange. Every retelling added details about human defensive innovations, making their capabilities seem both impressive and accessible. The collective assessment that emerged positioned humans as definitely primitive and probably crazy, but the useful kind of primitive and crazy that made excellent allies and terrible enemies. This backhanded compliment actually represented significant diplomatic capital, It acknowledged their effectiveness while maintaining cultural distance, allowing other species to collaborate without fully endorsing human methods. The bluff that yielded this influence wasn't really about deception. It was about controlled disclosure of capabilities at precisely calibrated moments. The hidden defensive network, the hybrid technologies, the coordinated reveal, all demonstrated strategic patience rather than desperation. This approach generated lasting influence far beyond the immediate confrontation, making humanity partners rather than subjects in subsequent negotiations, which brings us to the ultimate human specialty, making annoyance profitable. They'd turned their reputation for stubbornness and unconventional thinking into tangible diplomatic and economic advantages. Their ability to inconvenience larger powers became marketable expertise. Species that might have dismissed them as primitive now sought their counsel on defensive strategies and resistance techniques. This transformation from isolation to influence illustrates how reputation operates in galactic politics. It's not just about power. It's about perceived usefulness and reliability. Humanity's value increased precisely because they'd proven difficult to assimilate, suggesting they might help others achieve similar resistance. Their stubbornness became their most valuable export, and the galaxy suddenly wanted to purchase shares. You know how humans spent millennia figuring out what to do when something larger wants to eat you? Their evolutionary path taught them to make predators regret their career choices. Hartwell's observation about humanity being the universe's favorite chew toy reveals this deeper biological truth. Their survival didn't come from brute strength or natural weapons. It came from stubborn creativity and the ability to turn weaknesses into advantages time after time. This isn't just military doctrine or cultural preference. It's written right into their DNA. Anthropological studies across human history show this pattern repeating. When faced with superior force, they don't try to match it directly. They find ways to make their opponent's advantages irrelevant through terrain manipulation, tool use, and collaborative problem-solving. The Zephyrian encounter becomes just another chapter in this long story of underestimated organisms not just surviving but thriving against apparent odds. Their technology reflects this evolutionary inheritance perfectly. Look at their ship designs, robust, redundant systems that keep functioning after taking significant damage. They prioritize survival over elegance, functionality over appearance. A human vessel might look primitive compared to sleek alien designs, but it's built to absorb punishment and keep operating. This design philosophy comes directly from their history of having to make do with limited resources while facing larger threats. Even their diplomatic approach shows this pattern. They turn confrontations into collaborations through what appears to be stubbornness, but is actually highly refined negotiation strategy. When threatened, they don't panic or submit. They look for ways to redefine the conversation entirely. Their ability to pivot from potential conflict to mutual benefit arrangements demonstrates the same adaptive thinking that kept their ancestors alive against larger predators. What looks primitive to advanced empires is actually highly specialized survival adaptation. Humans have refined the art of making invasion mathematically unappealing through preparation, terrain modification, and strategic positioning. Their entire defensive philosophy comes from millennia of learning that you don't need to be the strongest predator, you just need to be the most inconvenient prey possible. This specialization makes them exceptionally good at specific things: enduring hardship, adapting technology, turning disadvantages into strengths. Their ships maintain functionality after damage that would disable more advanced vessels because they assume things will go wrong and plan accordingly. Their defensive networks favor distributed resilience over concentrated power because they've learned that survival often depends on having multiple backup options. The pack mentality that emerges under threat isn't just social behavior, it's operational doctrine written at the genetic level. Threaten one human, and you trigger collective response patterns that have been evolving for millions of years. This cohesion under pressure allows them to achieve technological and strategic advances that seem impossible for their developmental level. They don't just work together, they become a single organism with shared purpose when challenged. But here's the thing about specialization. It makes you very good at very specific things while leaving gaps elsewhere. Humans excel at survival scenarios and adaptive problem solving, but their approaches can seem bizarre or inefficient to species that developed different evolutionary strategies. Their willingness to accept massive inconvenience for security Their preference for redundant systems over elegant designs, their focus on making environments hostile to invaders. All these reflect their particular evolutionary journey as medium-sized creatures in a dangerous world.
You know how they say peace through strength isn't free?
Humanity pays for their security in mountains of excavated rock and institutional paranoia. The Gibraltar Protocol represents the kind of economic commitment that makes accountants develop nervous twitches. Those tunnels don't dig themselves, those weapon platforms don't manufacture themselves, and that distributed defense network doesn't maintain itself. The resources required would make most species reconsider their entire budgetary priorities. This level of preparedness demands societal commitment that goes beyond simple defense spending. It requires choosing security over comfort, vigilance over relaxation, and long-term survival over short-term luxury. Economic analysis across multiple civilizations shows deterrent strategies consistently consume resources that could otherwise fuel economic growth or improve living standards. Humanity accepts this trade-off with what appears to be collective shrug. They'd rather have functional defenses than fancy consumer goods. Their ship design philosophy reflects this priority structure perfectly. Functional over beautiful, survivable over efficient, redundant over elegant. A human vessel might look like someone welded together spare parts that refuse to quit, but it'll keep functioning after damage that would disable sleeker alien designs. This approach isn't accidental, it's the manifestation of economic choices that value longevity and resilience over aesthetic appeal or maximum efficiency. Even their diplomatic approach carries hidden costs that other species often overlook. Constant threat assessment, relationship maintenance, negotiation preparation. These require dedicated resources and institutional attention. The human diplomatic corps operates with the understanding that every interaction potentially affects security, which means they invest significantly in preparation and analysis that more relaxed civilizations might consider excessive. The Zephyrians likely underestimated this cultural willingness to endure inconvenience for the sake of independence. Their intelligence assessments probably noted human defense expenditures, but failed to comprehend the societal consensus behind them. Most species treat defense as one priority among many. Humanity treats it as the foundation upon which all other priorities rest. This isn't stubbornness, it's calculated investment in long-term autonomy based on historical experience. What appears from the outside as irrational commitment to defense actually represents sophisticated cost-benefit analysis. Humans have decided that the price of constant preparedness is cheaper than the alternative of subjugation or destruction. Their economic models apparently show that building extensive defensive networks costs less than rebuilding after invasion or paying tribute to expansionist empires. This calculation might seem paranoid until you consider their historical pattern of being proven right. The resource allocation reveals interesting cultural values. They'll redirect entire industrial outputs toward defense projects, accept slower economic growth in non-military sectors, and prioritize infrastructure that serves security purposes. This isn't desperation, it's strategic planning based on the assumption that threats will eventually emerge and being unprepared proves more expensive than maintaining readiness. Their alliance-building efforts also reflect this cost-conscious approach. By collaborating with other species, they reduce their individual defense burden while gaining access to technologies and intelligence that would be prohibitively expensive to develop independently. This pragmatic recognition that shared security can be more cost-effective than going it alone demonstrates sophisticated, strategic thinking masked by their apparent simplicity. Which brings us to the ultimate question hiding beneath all these economic calculations. Was preserving their independence worth the tremendous ongoing costs? The answer appears to be a resounding yes, based on their continued investment patterns and political decisions. They seem to consider autonomy something you can't put a price on, or rather something worth any price necessary to maintain it. You know how some moments change everything? The confrontation with the Zephyrians rewrote humanity's place in the cosmos so thoroughly that their entire identity shifted. What began as a potential invasion scenario became foundational mythology for how humans approach galactic relations. Future encounters across 7 systems would reference the Zephyrian misunderstanding as diplomatic shorthand for the moment when assumptions get completely recalibrated. This defining moment gave humanity something more valuable than security. It gave them identity, They became known as the species that outthinks rather than outfights, that prefers strategic creativity to brute force. Historical analysis across multiple civilizations shows these pivotal encounters shape cultural narratives for generations. The story of standing up to overwhelming odds becomes part of how a species understands itself and its place in the universe. The retribution transformed from a simple warship into a symbol of determined problem-solving rather than aggression. Its rugged functional design came to represent human practicality and resilience. The vessel's appearance in that confrontation shifted from military asset to cultural icon, representing their willingness to invest incredible resources into defending their independence. Hartwell's subsequent promotion to outer systems defense coordinator acknowledged the value of strategic creativity over pure force. His approach during the confrontation demonstrated that careful preparation and unconventional thinking could achieve what traditional military responses might not. This institutional recognition signaled that humanity valued adaptability in psychological warfare as much as technological advancement. Even the Zephyrians gained something valuable from the encounter, a lesson in humility and the importance of reassessment. Their initial arrogance gave way to grudging respect, eventually transforming into genuine collaboration. This shift demonstrated that even expansionist empires could learn from encounters with stubborn species who refused to follow expected patterns. The universe became more interesting and slightly safer when diversity included these stubborn mammals. Their presence introduced new approaches to conflict resolution, defense planning, and interspecies relations. Other civilizations began recognizing that different evolutionary paths could produce equally valid survival strategies, even if they seemed unconventional at first glance. The narrative that emerged from this event spread through diplomatic channels and social networks, creating a reputation that preceded human diplomats. They became known as difficult but valuable partners, stubborn but creative problem solvers. This reputation opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed to a species at their technological level. But here's the thing about legacies. They're written by the survivors. The story of this confrontation wasn't crafted by historians analyzing records. It was shaped by the participants who lived through it and chose how to remember the events. The humans emphasized their creativity and resilience. The Zephyrians focused on their willingness to reassess and adapt, and both versions contained truth. This shared narrative became the foundation for mutual defense treaties, trade agreements, and cultural exchange programs that extended far beyond the original encounter. The initial confrontation created frameworks for interaction that would influence interspecies relations for decades. What began as a potential conflict became a template for successful diplomatic engagement between unequal powers. The lasting impact transformed humanity from emerging species to established galactic civilization. Their approach, combining careful preparation, strategic deception, and refusal to be intimidated, proved remarkably effective. They managed to maintain independence while forming profitable relationships with neighbors, demonstrating that stubbornness and creativity could overcome apparent disadvantages. The universe turned out to be much more interesting than anyone had anticipated, largely because humanity's unconventional approach introduced new possibilities for how species might interact. Their legacy wasn't just about their own survival. It was about expanding the range of what seemed possible in galactic politics and defense strategy. You know what keeps intelligence analysts staring at ceiling tiles long into the night cycle? The things humans haven't shown. The capabilities they revealed to the Zephyrians represented only what was necessary to achieve deterrence, not their full capacity. This calculated disclosure creates strategic ambiguity that's deliberately designed to keep potential adversaries guessing about their true capabilities. The Gibraltar Protocol suggests much deeper defensive layers than what was demonstrated. That honeycomb of tunnels and hidden positions likely extends far beyond the perimeter defense grid. The 3-year construction timeline for their capital ship implies accelerated industrial capacity that shouldn't be possible with their supposed technological level. Standard strategic analysis always assumes revealed strength represents only a fraction of actual capability. And with humans, this principle applies exponentially. The alien assistance programs almost certainly included technologies not yet demonstrated. Their allies provided more than just defensive systems. They shared intelligence, tactical doctrines, and operational experience that enhanced human capabilities in ways that aren't immediately visible. This knowledge transfer creates unpredictable advantages that don't show up on standard threat assessments. Humanity's pack mentality suggests broader alliances and shared capabilities beyond what was revealed. Their willingness to collaborate indicates they've built networks that extend far beyond the three species mentioned. These relationships create force multipliers that make their defensive posture more formidable than simple technological assessments would indicate. Even their historical anecdote about digging holes implies innovative tactical thinking beyond the examples they shared. That story wasn't just about literal holes. It signaled a mindset of using terrain and creativity to overcome technological disadvantages. This approach suggests they've developed unconventional tactics that haven't been observed in action yet. The true measure of human capability remains intentionally obscured, and that strategic ambiguity serves as a powerful deterrent. Uncertainty forces potential adversaries to plan for worst-case scenarios rather than likely scenarios. It makes aggression calculations much more difficult because you can't accurately assess what you'll be facing. This approach exploits inherent limitations in intelligence gathering and decision-making processes. When you don't know an opponent's full capabilities, you tend to overestimate their strengths and prepare for possibilities that might not exist. Humans understand this psychological effect and use it to their advantage. Their defensive doctrine assumes everything will go wrong during conflicts and plans accordingly. This mindset leads to redundant systems, contingency planning, and hidden capabilities that aren't apparent during normal operations. What looks like paranoia to other species is actually sophisticated risk management. The rapid militarization following alien contact suggests they can scale their capabilities quickly when threatened. Their industrial base appears more flexible and responsive than traditional models would predict. This adaptability makes them particularly difficult to assess using standard military metrics. The psychological impact of uncertainty often outweighs the physical threat of known capabilities. Not knowing what humans might reveal next creates hesitation and caution in potential adversaries. This hesitation gives humanity time to prepare further defenses or seek additional alliances, which brings us to why strategic ambiguity might be the strongest deterrent of all. It turns the unknown into an asset rather than a liability. While other species try to display their full strength to intimidate opponents, humans understand that sometimes the most frightening thing is what you haven't seen yet. You know what confuses everyone about humans? They're simultaneously primitive and advanced in ways that make categorization impossible. Their technology presents this perfect contradiction. They'll use brute force kinetic projectiles alongside sophisticated network systems that would impress the most advanced civilizations. It's like watching someone mount a laser targeting system on a sledgehammer and somehow making the combination work better than either option alone. Their diplomacy operates on similar contradictory principles. They mix straightforward honesty with elaborate misdirection, creating the strategic ambiguity that keeps everyone guessing. One moment they're transparent about their capabilities. The next they're employing psychological tactics that would make veteran negotiators question their own assessments. This blend of openness and deception creates environments where conventional assessment models consistently fail. Their ship design philosophy embodies this paradox perfectly. Vessels that look outdated and piecemeal somehow perform beyond specifications in combat scenarios. They prioritize functionality and survivability over aesthetic appeal, creating warships that might appear primitive but can withstand damage that would disable more elegant designs. This emphasis on resilience over technological sophistication represents a fundamental difference in how they approach problem solving. Philosophical analysis reveals humanity as a species of contradictions. They're individualistic yet communal, peaceful yet prepared for conflict, technologically advanced yet willing to use seemingly primitive solutions. The Zephyrian encounter highlighted this perfectly. They presented as primitive mammals while deploying dreadnoughts and extensive tunnel networks. This apparent inconsistency isn't accidental. It's strategic. Even their galactic reputation became paradoxical. They're simultaneously viewed as threateningly capable and appealingly collaborative. This ambiguity makes them unpredictable negotiation partners and dangerous potential adversaries. Other species can't easily categorize them, which creates hesitation and caution in diplomatic interactions. That uncertainty works to humanity's advantage. forcing others to prepare for multiple possibilities. This paradox isn't some accident of development. It's a deliberate feature of their evolutionary and cultural trajectory. Their history as medium-sized predators in a dangerous environment taught them to turn weaknesses into advantages. They learned that survival often depends on being unpredictable and adaptable, rather than simply powerful. This approach has been refined over millennia into their current strategic posture. The human blend of brute force and sophisticated strategy creates multi-layered defenses that are difficult to penetrate or assess. Their use of kinetic projectiles combined with advanced defensive systems represents this contradictory approach. They're not choosing between options. They're using all available tools simultaneously, even when those tools seem incompatible. Their defensive protocols exemplify this paradoxical thinking. Visible strong points conceal hidden fortifications and weapon positions, creating layered defenses that are both robust and difficult to evaluate. This approach forces adversaries to consider possibilities rather than probabilities, making strategic planning much more complex. Their willingness to embrace unconventional tactics demonstrates this adaptive flexibility. When faced with technological disadvantages, they'll use terrain, psychology, and creativity to create unexpected challenges. This adaptability allows them to overcome apparent limitations and redefine engagement parameters. But here's the thing about paradoxes. They break conventional assessment models. Standard military and diplomatic frameworks assume consistency and predictability. Humanity's contradictory nature makes these models useless for understanding or predicting their behavior. This strategic ambiguity becomes their greatest advantage, as it forces others to prepare for multiple, contradictory possibilities simultaneously. The human approach to conflict and diplomacy reflects their evolutionary development as a species that survived through innovation and adaptability. Their paradoxical nature isn't confusion. It's sophisticated strategy disguised as inconsistency. They've learned that sometimes the most effective approach is to be multiple things at once, especially when those things seem mutually exclusive. You know how after major seismic events, cartographers have to redraw all the maps? The galactic political landscape just experienced that exact reshuffling. Humanity's successful defense against the Zephyrians sent ripple effects across neighboring systems that continue to reshape alliances and power structures. The demonstration that preparation and creativity could counter superior technology forced everyone to reconsider their strategic assumptions. Other species that had been quietly accommodating expansionist policies suddenly found new options available. Civilizations that had accepted inevitable integration began exploring alternative arrangements. The balance of power shifted from pure technological superiority to include strategic innovation and defensive determination. This recalibration made the galaxy significantly more complicated for empires accustomed to predictable conquest patterns. The Zephyrian Empire itself underwent substantial internal reassessment following the encounter. Their intelligence-gathering protocols likely received comprehensive overhaul, with expanded parameters for evaluating potential resistance. Expansion timelines were probably extended to allow for more thorough threat analysis. The assumption of technological superiority, giving automatic victory, was replaced with more nuanced assessment. Models that factored in psychological and strategic variables. Humanity became an unexpected model for achieving security through preparation rather than aggression. Their approach combining distributed defense networks, redundant systems, and terrain utilization offered alternatives to traditional military buildup. Smaller civilizations began studying human defensive strategies as potential templates for their own protection. The concept of making invasion mathematically unappealing gained currency across multiple systems. Their technology-sharing agreements expanded to include other threatened civilizations, creating networks of mutual assistance that crossed traditional alliance boundaries. These arrangements weren't based on historical ties or cultural similarity, but on shared interest in maintaining independence. This practical approach to alliance building created new diplomatic patterns that prioritized functionality over formality. Even human cultural exports gained unexpected value following the confrontation. Other species developed fascination with the so-called hole-digging species and their unique approach to problem-solving. The narrative of resilient underdogs using creativity to overcome advantages resonated across cultural boundaries. This cultural curiosity opened doors for exchange programs and mutual understanding initiatives. The confrontation achieved what surrender never could have: genuine respect and enduring influence. Humanity gained a seat at the table not through conquest or threat, but through demonstrated capability and strategic thinking. Their willingness to stand firm against overwhelming odds created credibility that translated into tangible diplomatic capital. Which brings us to the ultimate measure of success in interstellar relations: continued existence on your own terms. Humanity managed to secure their independence while forming productive relationships with neighbors. They demonstrated that preparation and creativity could level the playing field against superior forces. Their approach showed that defense could be as strategically valuable as offense in maintaining autonomy. The new normal looks considerably different from the old assumptions. Expansionist calculations now must include the possibility of meeting organized, creative resistance. Defensive strategies have gained legitimacy as viable alternatives to military buildup. The galaxy became more interesting and slightly safer when species realized that preparation and determination could counter technological advantages. This shift in galactic dynamics reflects broader changes in how civilizations perceive security and influence. The human example demonstrated that reputation could be built through resilience and strategic innovation, rather than traditional power metrics. Their success created space for alternative approaches to interstellar relations that value adaptability over pure strength. The lasting impact continues to unfold as more species adopt elements of human strategic thinking. The focus has shifted from overwhelming force to creating sustainable security arrangements that allow for independence and mutual benefit. This recalibration makes the galactic community more diverse and ultimately more stable, as multiple paths to security become recognized as valid. So the next time someone arrives with battleships the size of cities, remember, humans brought something far worse: the sheer stubbornness to dig holes until reality conforms to their expectations. Their real strength wasn't hidden fleets or oversized artillery. It was the quiet refusal to let anyone else define their limits. That mix of resilience and defiance makes them equal parts fascinating and alarming to share a galaxy with. Neighbors who won't back down, but might just help you dig a few holes of your own should the need arise.